Welcome, everyone, to our press conference. I'm Ross O'Brien, a senior editor with the MIT Technology Review Insights. I write about sustainability, decarbonization, and digital transformation for the MIT Technology Review. I'm very excited to be joined by Frédéric Godemel, who's Executive Vice President for Power Systems and Services at Schneider Electric. And we're here to launch a new report that the two organizations have been working on over the past few months. Our report, which is entitled Equipment Management and Sustainability, How Global Businesses Use Insight and Innovation to Make Their Manufacturing Processes and Assets Carbon Neutral, discusses the ways firms are applying their decarbonization strategies and practices to their manufacturing processes, design, and management. Before we get into the report's finding, Fred, I'm wondering, by way of introduction, if you can share with us what sustainability, broadly stated, means for Schneider Electric.
Hey Ross, thanks to invite me and join you and go a bit deeper into the studies and finding you made. At Schneider Electric, sustainability is really something we started many years ago, I would say between 10 to 15 years ago, and we're running into our cycles of improvement of sustainability. The way we started was very much around one single motto, which is if you cannot measure something, it's very difficult to improve it. So we use basically part of our offers, and especially metering, drives, and things like that. So offers that were allowing us to monitor energy. We use that pretty early, I say more than 10 years ago, in most of our sites to be able to understand what's our real energy consumption. And based on that, we went into waves of improvement of programs on first tackling our own energy and then moving to a broader sustainability view. Of course, at that time, we didn't know where all those would brought us. It brought us extremely far because we went up to creating consulting capabilities to help customers on their sustainability journey. Keeping in mind that the first thing, if you want to improve, is to measure where you are and then build improvement plans on clear measurement, which is still a strong part of our journey also.
Looking at this, that's definitely what we'll be looking at in this report. And I think that's also underlining one of the core themes that we've discovered in this report, which is that as analytics and insight tools become more prevalent and more powerful on the factory floor, the ability to decarbonize through insight is making that process which was once incidental, now intentional. Modernizing manufacturing processes has reduced the amount of equipment and energy and raw materials that have been used in them. But up until recently, that was largely just seen in terms of process efficiency gains, basically cost savings for the firm. Now, as customers, investors, and an entire stakeholder community requires firms to be very explicit and transparent in their ESG objectives, sustainability itself is becoming the primary goal of process improvements. And that puts the manufacturing floor in a very important command and control point for producers, particularly now as many firms are being called upon to expand their expand their view upon scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and as a result, reduce them. The up and downstream supply chain relationships that a manufacturer have are becoming equally important as the amount of energy they expend on the factory floor itself. Now, with this increased focus on data analytics and the use of machine learning to get a better bead on the carbon footprint of your operations, Fred, can you walk me through what exactly it looks like to view what does a carbon footprint look like from the view of a factory floor?
Well, Ross, as I said at the beginning, in many aspects, we try to implement what we explain to our customers in our own sites, right? So today at Schneider Electric, we deploy the concept that customers can go on site and visit, basically, which is what we call smart factories. We have today 6 of them. One, I'm going to come back on this one that is in France. We have in India, in China, in US, in Indonesia. And basically, we're expanding this concept. That means we are moving our plants, all our plants, to what we call smart factories in order to experiment locally technologies. So if I give you the example of the plant we have in Le Vaudreuil in France, this plant has implemented a set of IoT sensors at process and at energy level, right? Means we are able to permanently compare the efficiency of the process with the energy usage. What we have achieved by doing that, a few examples. We have been able to reduce power consumption by 25%. We have been able to reduce material waste as well by optimizing the process. And if you look, for example, in this plant, we have equipped the factory with a zero reject water recycling station, which basically this station being connected to the cloud, managed with AI and analytics, it allows us to predict, use the process and optimize the process so that we really can move with a very strong reduction of water usage. We speak here about 64% of reduction of water usage. So these are examples of what we call the fourth industrial revolution, which is basically linking process with power so that we can optimize the process and optimize the power consumption, or eventually the waste, the waste print of a given plant.
Oh, that's really interesting. Now, as you become, if you like, kind of a global set of best practices around fourth industrial revolution transformations, are you able to port any of that expertise over to your clients and business partners?
Yeah, absolutely, Ross. We basically are working with a set of companies all across the world. I started by mentioning that we work with them, with some of them, on advising on their sustainability journey. And for some of them, we go up to implementing solutions. I can give you an example of large customer like Veolia, Johnson & Johnson, and some other on which we go along with them on their journey to process improvement and decarbonization. To give you the example of Johnson & Johnson, to not give only Schneider example, we transform fundamentally the way G&G approach sustainability and manufacturing design, right? And we have been able to help them with analysis, like failure mode analysis, with their facility, determine where there is a total cost optimization into their process. And then we went into the production process. We linked it with some of the elements of analytics to be able to improve the output of the production process. And thanks to this analytics, we now can go into a second stage, which is looking at where their processes need eventually to be modernized, sometimes electrified, sometimes generating lower consumption of CO2 because there is part of the processes that is running when it is not useful. So we basically go into a full journey, a systemic journey to what we call sustainable manufacturing.
Yeah, I've noticed that in the course of this research, we spoke to a number of firms around the world about how they are kind of evolving their asset management practices to take more and clearer views on their carbon footprint. And we have found that asset management and if you like, production asset extension models are becoming prime tools that many use to accelerate their decarbonization. I also spoke to Johnson & Johnson and spoke to folks in their consumer goods department that are using digital twinning, using virtual reality to make exact copies of the architecture of manufacturing processes and testing manufacturing runs in virtual space before committing them to actual carbon emitting physical space. And that not only makes their runs more efficient and more material effective, it also from the start reduces energy consumption and reduces the carbon input of their material usage. We've seen total cost of ownership analysis being used, again, obviously as a tool first and foremost to keep costs down, but increasingly to specifically look at how machinery intensive products can be made more efficient from the start, so that over the entirety of the life of everything that comes off the factory floor, the carbon intensity is lessened from what you've done right in the planning process. Does that resonate with what you're seeing in the field?
Yes, absolutely. That resonates a lot. As I explained before, we start some of our engagement with a holistic consulting approach on looking at all the domain of sustainability for an enterprise or for a large site. And then we look at the entirety of what's making basically a sustainability footprint, right? So we go through energy management, of course, the corporate sustainability, what is the level of data that is required, how we can as well manage better resources, and we go up to advising customer on most simple energy procurement strategies, which in many ways can help them to be greener, especially if they favor a higher dose of electricity and renewable into what they do. We help as well organization on other topic, which is simulations, right? And we combine at Schneider capability. You mentioned digital twins and things like that. We mentioned capability to simulate processes, being able to run scenario, can be on process or on the energy chain, to be able to anticipate what's going to happen physically and then optimize by design some processes, some energy chain, some eventual microgrid where you could inject a bit more of renewable into the process. And when we did consulting, there is a last area on which people came to us, especially large user of our material, is circularity. And I can give you an example of one of our core offer, which is Masterpact, a low voltage breaker, on which we have introduced recently circular capability to be able to recycle some of our products that were still usable and re-inject them into the cell network as a second-hand product. This saves as well a lot of CO2 by doing that.
Yes, circularity is definitely a topic that keeps coming up amongst firms that are trying to figure out their total carbon footprint. And I think it's beginning to go a lot further beyond the reuse, recycle origins of it, and really trying to address how an entire product, again, a product lifecycle or a relationship with a customer contributes to a completely carbon neutral experience. I mean, we spoke to another of your customers, I believe, Renault Trucks, who is currently launching a factory, the first of its kind, the first of a major OEM producer, that is specifically designed to disassemble trucks and recoup viable spare parts for putting back into into their sales pipeline. Now, that's obviously not the end goal. Renault Trucks has a very stringent goal of becoming a major producer and service provider of electronic vehicles within quite a short timeline. And in order to do that, it has to, in a sense, contain and manage the productive lifespan of its traditional internal combustion engines products, while advancing a circular economy based electric vehicle model that is, as the chief sustainability officer there referred to it to me, as equipment as a service. So in the future, Renault will no longer see cars or their electric trucks as a product that rolls off the shelf, but as a mobility service that they extend to their customers and manage both the asset quality and the carbon footprint throughout its entire life. What other circularity models are you seeing being adopted today, Fred?
Look, we have to admit that is probably the next revolution, circularity, after the one we are in, which is sustainability. Today, we are in B2B, we are really at the start of this journey, right? We cannot say that is deployed at scale, but we're looking at that very precisely at Schneider Electric because we believe this is where the future resides. And when we look the tension we have today in the supply chain, I believe it's simply accelerating this move to circularity. The entire chain is not completely ready. For example, processes to take back product at scale and companies that could recycle those products is not completely existing. We have started at Schneider Electric to experiment that on few of our offers. We are able, for example, to take back product with SF6 because SF6 it's a gas that is not great for the environment. We are working on our generation of UPS to be able to recycle them. And you mentioned asset as a service. We have launched last year a capability to go for UPS as a service, means we commit on basically leasing those products and taking them back at the end of the leasing contract, which remove from the user the potential problems that they would have to recycle the product. So we're organizing ourselves to be able step by step to take back and recondition product, which is basically the way we see the economy going into the next decades, most probably.
So one of the things that we hear quite a lot about is developing more flexible and modular manufacturing facilities, which again is largely started as a way of becoming both more in tune with customer requirements and be able to quickly adapt to changes in product and service requirements. But it's actually now becoming a very powerful tool in also advancing decarbonization strategies, not least because a flexible, more modular, more data-driven factory is also one where you can manage both material inputs, but importantly, power into the factory. And the more visibility and tools you have to manage productivity in real time, the more ability, I'm presuming, you have to also affect not only the amount of power consumed, but where that power comes from. Can you talk a little bit more about how power optimization and kind of clean power optimization is likely to manifest itself in a more decarbonized world?
Look, that is another topic that I touched briefly, and I can go a bit deeper. We call that at Schneider Life is on. Life is on means processes are working, but they are working using electricity, which is a green source of energy, and maximizing in this electricity portion the maximum of green generation. So a site tomorrow will be a site where you will have local generation, okay, like renewable or eventually hydro or eventually wind in some areas, right? So you will have those local generation. This local generation will probably not supply 100% of the need of the site permanently, but you can go into most of the industrial processes between 15 to 30% of renewable generation. On this site, you will have electrical vehicle that, by the way, can be charged at a period where the process eventually don't need the full supply of energy. In order to do that, you need a large investment in the digital backbone of your process and on your energy stations, basically, because you need to introduce the notion of flexibility. Means you need to permanently be able to switch from your own generation on site with the grid, okay? And that's what we call prosumer, means you become a producer and a consumer of energy. By doing that, of course, you reduce significantly your carbon footprint. Because you have digitized your processes, you make sure that the things are running only when needed. That means you eliminate processes that could run or pumps that could run where they are not necessarily useful. And then by doing that, you optimize your energy footprint. You could tell me, oh, it's a long future. Guess what? All those solutions are affordable now, and they have a return of investment which is in most of the cases below 3 years, in maximum 5 years, means they are completely affordable. And if you want to go into a journey towards sustainability, that's exact example of where you need to go through.
Great. Well, Fred, thanks for that, and thanks for that very comprehensive view. I think we're gonna switch a bit and take some questions from the chat. And this first one, I'm going to take a little bit of liberties with, because and reorder. The question is asking about the exact CO2 emissions of your products, and I doubt you have that level of detail to hand. But let's expand that notion. If today, is there a way that that you or your team can easily take a look at a dashboard or some other measure that gives you a sense of what your product lines, your various product lines, are generating in terms of emissions? In other words, how visible and how granular is your carbon footprint to your decision maker?
Look, Ross, I would eventually in this call not give all the details, but for you to know, we have all that. So the aggregate version at Schneider Electric of our CO2 footprint is published in our sustainability report, and this one is fully available with our financial report, and is part of the things that we publish and update every year, of course, and we follow at an extremely regular frequency. Now, if the person that asks the question is interested about the CO2 footprint of a given product, he can go on our Schneider website, right? Click on the product, and then he will have what we call green premium, which is basically a set of attributes that goes along with our product, and he will have the product environmental print of each of the range. So if you want a given detail, for example, you buy a switch gear, or you buy a drive, or you click on this one, and you will have the exact product environmental print, means what is the capacity to recycle this product, and what is CO2 emission to produce the product. So all those informations are available, and we're working on them as we speak, means we're permanently looking at them and look at optimizing some of them. For example, I mentioned that already, we had one gas in medium voltage that was SF6, that the CO2 print of this gas was fairly negative, right? We decided to replace those products with solutions based on air. And by doing that, we have significantly reduced the carbon footprint and the CO2 emission of our product.
So these tools not only allow you to measure and monitor, but but there is sort of an optimization element as well. Can you also do you see a future, and if the present it's available in the present, please let me know, whereby these tools can be shared with supply chain partners, the investment community? In other words, can firms that are using these tools to calculate and manage their CO2 emissions share this data to help their greater ecosystem do the same?
Absolutely. So it's in the coming future in most of our software tools, and especially the design tools. We are looking at injecting into those design tools. If you look a tool like ETAP, which is a design of electrical distribution, we are looking at injecting into those tools the carbon elements, the CO2 elements of a given installation, which allow you to simulate eventually what you can achieve by redesigning your installation and what is the impact of the choice you're making in terms of products, right? In addition of that, we have equipped all our services team with what we call a CO2 calculator, because when we service some of the offer, we sometimes extend their life duration. And by doing that, of course, is better because you don't need to replace by new. And we are able to give the information to our customers on what is the optimization of CO2 by choosing one solution versus another one.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Fred. We're coming almost to time in our broadcast, so if there are any last questions, please do input them into the virtual room. But by way of a follow-on to that, we often talk about decarbonization as a set of activities that is well, long and complex, and as this afternoon's conversation has revealed, one that requires a lot of data and insight into the entirety of your operations. At the same time, what I've found in speaking to sustainability officers and manufacturing executives around the world is that the actual on the factory floor carbon emissions sometimes doesn't account for all that great a percentage of a manufacturer's overall footprint. So it really is beholden to them to understand the carbon inputs before they arrive on the assembly line and long after the products left the building. So if you were, Fred, world decarbonization czar, and had to set forward a checklist that producers should follow to steer themselves towards carbon neutrality, what would that checklist look like? What would be some of the first things that you would want a aspiring carbon neutral manufacturer to deploy in their facilities?
Look, you ask for a checklist. The first thing is measure, okay? Because frankly, you may eventually be surprised because we all come with bias into this journey, and probably the first thing to do is measure, okay? So try to understand where are the quick wins and the easy to achieve savings, right? And after, you'll probably go around a few lines, which are energy efficiency in your office building, in your plants, electrify, so replacing fossil fuel burning by electricity. It can be mobility, if mobility is a big part of your personal of your company CO2 emission. It can be looking at part of your processes that eventually burn fossil fuel, and especially if you burn fuel, that's not great for the environment. So you can probably move a large part of that to electrification, and by doing so, you're able already to make a first step in your journey. And of course, after, once you have measured, you permanently can improve. Means you will see that the more you measure, the more you identify your top 3 areas, and the more you can build your own plan. So there is not a standard recipe, but there is a few things that come as a pattern in most of the customers we work with.
Right. Well, Fred, thanks for that. And I think that brings us right full circle back in our circularity of conversation. We've come back to the core message of this report, which is data and insights are absolutely vital to addressing and accelerating your decarbonization agenda. Well, Fred, I'd really like to thank you for your time. Will be morning your time, afternoon mine, and of all time zones in between for our viewers. Again, I'm joined by Frederic Godemel, who's Executive VP for Power Systems and Services at Schneider Electric. I'm Ross O'Brien with the MIT Technology Review, and we've been talking about equipment management and sustainability, the new report from Schneider Electric and MIT Tech Review. Thanks a lot for your time. Have a good afternoon.
And thanks, Ross. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.